it'll never happen in bankruptcy, as we know, Gina, right?
New York attorneys.
What would Laura do? I mean, she makes more money between 6 and 3 a.m. than, a week.
She makes a lot of money on restaurants.
Yes, I turned 12:59.
Oh, you're talking about the Mitchells. The Creamery. I didn't know I was involved in it.
I thought she was.
Because I know that family. Debbie Mitchell started. I from Carpenter. Contractor worked on this structural. And I went to high school. What do you stay?
No, I stayed there. Secretary won't last time search for that.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Delaware Public Service Commission's meeting of August 21st, 2018. We have a wonderful, great meeting coming up, including a settlement of a Delmarva case with the parties. We have a rock star of renewable energy, Harry Warren, in the house. We have our former executive director in the house. And I would like to ask one of our star staff members, Pam Knotts, to come to the front of the room. Now, Pam hasn't been here for 10 years, and she's not getting a certificate. She's not, no, come up here. She hasn't been here for 15 years, or 20 years, or 25 years. It may seem that way to her sometimes. But the reason I'm asking her to come forward is there's nothing specifically I can do to courtesy of the state. But I just wanted to say that Pam has been working on renewable energy issues for a long time. And she's a great, great help to me anytime I've got an issue. If I need someone to cover for me, a Reggie phone call. We greatly appreciate her service. And just recently, she had the duty of writing an answer to a bunch of questions on PERPA. And I'm not going to ask anybody what that is.
Jimmy
Don't ask
Carter.
me either necessarily, but anyway, so she answered them for me. So we as commissioners and the staff, we want to express our appreciation to Pam for all her good work. We couldn't give her a certificate, so we got this. And we
I'd
thought
rather have
maybe
this.
That's better than a certificate anyway.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And make sure to recycle these after 10 days.
So it looks like all of the staff's proposals will flower this year.
Oh, funny.
Okay, first thing on our agenda is the reading of the meeting minutes of August the 7th, both the public and executive. Does any commissioner have any amendment or correction to the proposed, or to the minutes? Commissioner Gray was supposed to be calling in. I'm not sure if he's on yet or not, but he may be calling in. He's traveling as we speak. Having a motion to approve the minutes.
I move that we adopt the public meeting of August 7 and also the executive meeting
And I
on
second.
August 7.
Is there any discussion on the motion to approve the public and executive meeting minutes of August the 7th? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. 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 Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Is there any noes? Are there any abstentions?
Yes, I
Now,
abstain.
the aye was meant to indicate that Commissioner Gray is now on the phone. I was going to say hi to Commissioner Gray. Hi, Commissioner Gray.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Hello. I'll be on mute.
Except for my speech impediment, we're doing well. The consent agenda, is there anything on the consent agenda that any commissioner wishes to take off of the agenda? And if not, may we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion to, okay, second.
Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries, and Commissioner Gray is not voting. The regular agenda. Number 1 is in the matter of the review of customer choice in the state of Delaware. And we're going to consider the recommendations, findings and recommendations of our hearing examiner, who I believe is Mark Lawrence. Is Mark in the room? Okay, and we have Mr. Geddes on behalf of staff, and we've got Tom Goodman for DPL, who's going to be the proponent of this matter, first party. Mr. Goodman.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners. Todd Goodman on behalf of Delaware Power and Light Company. I believe this was initially opened by staff pursuant to a directive of the General Assembly, if I'm not wrong. But in any event, it's been, you can see from the docket number in 15 that it's been around for a while. A lot of work was done. We were able to resolve certain issues, and we were able to agree that some issues should be held in a different portion or a second stage of this docket, if you will, in order to save time, energy, and costs for everyone. We're going to wait and see about what happens with a few issues that are being investigated in Maryland now, because if those issues don't go through in Maryland, maybe RISA won't want to do them at all, and if they do, Delaware has agreed that we will, maybe not object or not object to some of them here, because we'll be doing them already in Maryland. So it's an effort to sort of save time and energy and costs for our customers, the Commission, and staff and DPA. But what we did do is we were able to reach agreement on, to go to hearings now on certain issues, and we did that. And I think the hearing examiner's report is quite clear. There was he issued a proposed order, which staff added, I believe, one clause to in order to just make something clear. As I understand, all the parties are in agreement to that form of order. Delmarva certainly is. And so should you adopt this, we will start moving forward and come up with a schedule for doing many of the things in here. Primarily the one that's going to take a little bit of time is putting together the purchase of receivables program. But we have a model to follow, which is what we're doing in our Maryland and DC jurisdictions, with one change, and it is that customers will keep the benefit of any late payment revenues brought in through the choice customers. So unless you have any questions, on behalf of DEMAR at least, we ask that you approve the proposed order, the version that was provided by staff through Mr. Geddes, because it has one additional provision, which I believe is 2, is it, Jim? Paragraph 2?
That's right.
Yes, it just, everyone agrees that should be in there, on this side of your bench.
Thank you, Mr. Goodman. Mr. Geddes?
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, I really don't have much to add to Mr. Goodman's comments. We did request that you consider our form of order, which would formally adopt the findings, recommendations of the hearing examiner, which was not in the first draft. I do believe the hearing examiner has, in a thorough way, developed what was before him and the reasons why the parties came to resolution. And I believe that no one takes exception to the hearing examiner's report or the proposed order that staff drafted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Geddes. Ms. Iori?
Thank you, Chairman Winslow. The public advocate has nothing to add to what you've already heard.
Thank you, Ms. Iori. Are there any other interveners present who wish to make any comments? Representative Kowalko, are you an intervener in this matter, or is it another matter?
I got here late, I apologize.
No, it's nothing to apologize.
Okay.
I don't believe you're in this matter. You're in the rate case matter.
Okay.
Yeah. This is one where we always say, we try to follow our fellow states with respect to some of these issues. This was interesting, where you have Illinois and Pennsylvania doing it one way, and Maryland and DC doing it the other way. And I think that the public advocate did a good job of putting some issues on the table, things to think about that aren't necessarily positive retail, but some really good food for thought. Any commissioners have any questions about that from the parties?
Move we approve proposed order number 9220. The version would be the second from staff as presented.
Second that motion?
Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate that. Number 2 on the regular agenda is in the matter of the application of Delmarva Power and Light Company to revise the UFRC rate or costs. And we're going to be considering proposed order number 9261. And who's going to begin this one? Delmarva? Okay, volunteer.
Thank you, Chair Winslow, Commissioners. Good afternoon. Lindsay Orr on behalf of Delmarva Power. We'd just like to thank staff and DPA for working with us to close this docket and for staff's work on the memo and proposed order. We've reviewed Ms. Knotz's memo and the proposed order and are in agreement with the contents of both. And as such, Delmarva respectfully requests that the Commission enter order number 9261, closing docket 16-0671.
Thank you, Ms. Orr.
Thank you.
Mr. Geddes?
I believe that would be me, Mr. Winslow.
Mr. Willard, then.
Yeah, the staff agrees with what was just said. This was an audit. The staff began the audit in 2017, and due to the tax law, there were some changes made. There was an over-collection, much of which has already been collected. A small de minimis amount will be collected in another future matter. And Ms. Knotts is here if you have any questions. Other than that, we ask that you approve order number 9261.
Thank you, Mr. Willard. Ms. Iori?
Thank you, Chairman Winslow. The only thing that I would add is that this proposed order also encompasses the error that the DPA found in the calculation of the UFRC with respect to the weighted cost of debt, and that has been corrected in this calculation of the UFRC, and with that, the public advocate supports order number 9261.
Thank you, Ms. Iori. Are there any other parties present? Any questions from the commissioners?
So I move that we adopt order number 9261.
My second.
Is there any discussion on the motion to approve proposed order number 9261? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries. Thank you very much, everyone. Number 3 is in the matter of the application of Delmarva Power and Light Company for an increase in electric base rates and miscellaneous tariff changes. We have the findings and recommendations of the hearing examiner, Mr. Lawrence, and we have the proposed order number 9248. And I understand that there are now no exceptions to the filing by the hearing examiner. Mr. Goodman?
That is correct.
I tell you what, I take it back. Mike Quinan, we're going to call on you first because I believe you're the senior member of the bar. And you've traveled the most distance. And you have to.
No, Michael Quinan, Your Honor, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. I'm Mike Quinan, and I represent the Delaware Energy Users Group, which is an intervener in this case. And the Delaware Energy Users Group is a group of the largest industrial customers of Delmarva Power in Delaware. And our interest in the case is generally to make sure that those customers are treated correctly and fairly in terms of allocation of the burden of the revenue requirement and such. But it is always a pleasure to watch counsel for the staff, counsel for the DPA, and counsel for Delmarva work out the terms of a full settlement. And even in these happy circumstances where we are able to put into effect a settlement that reduces the rates that customers are paying,
I want to absolutely assure you that the counsel who represented those parties in this case carefully sweated all of the small stuff. Even after an agreement in principle was reached on the big bottom line dollar amounts and all, and the hearing was conveyed, I think we spent 2.5 days sweating the small stuff, making sure that every bit of this settlement was fully chewed over. And from the perspective of the Delaware Energy Users Group, we are confident it's fair and would recommend its approval.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Goodman?
Thank you, Your Honor. And I'll tell you what, we do enjoy having Mr. Quinnen come up with these cases because he's a very pleasant guy to work with. He really is. And I know you can probably tell that from just listening to him. So if he wants to take the Delaware bar, I'll be a preceptor. Unless the chair wants to do it. So, in any event, this docket, as you know, Chair and Commissioners, was filed back on August 17th of 2017. And eventually, after an adjustment, the revenue request was approximately $31 million. Then we had some interesting legislation down in Washington known as we'll call it the TCJA, Tax Cuts and Job Act, which Delmarva asked, we want to put this in the case. We don't want to have to do another docket with this. And we had wonderful support on that from others in the case and from this commission. And so on February 9th, we were able to reduce the ask by approximately $19 million. We went through quite a bit of discovery. Sometimes we had to do it a couple times because of the tax cut change. That required a lot of investigation. It's very, very technical stuff. You have to have some people that really understand taxation, of which I am not. And we eventually were able to come to a complete settlement of all the terms in this case. The same day that we reached that settlement, we happened to be the second day of the hearings, so we went right in and had a hearing on the settlement. Hearing Examiner Lawrence issued a really very thorough report, really well organized. We're here today asking you to approve the settlement. Now, it's a little bit different than some of the others, only because of the detail that's involved in the TCJA portions of it. So if you'd like, I can just go through that real quickly if you think that'd be helpful. I don't want to waste your time, but there are some things that you're going to see on the bill that you've never seen before for a period of time. I'll do it real quickly.
Please.
Okay. So the overall reduction, meaning customers will see a reduction in the rates they pay of approximately $7 million. It's actually $6.85 million decrease. The rate of return presented to you for approval is 9.7. I'm sorry, that's the return on equity. I apologize. And the overall rate of return is 6.78%. The impact of the $7 million reduction to the typical residential customer is going to be a reduction of approximately $1.40 per month. And as you'll recall, we used to always calculate that based on a 1,000 kilowatt hour customer, but over the past decade, we have a real drop in use. A lot of reasons for that. Very good for customers, quite frankly, because it's also helped really bring down the price of energy, as you've seen in the last 10 years. The price of electricity has gone down significantly. So we're now basing it on 840 kilowatt hour customer. So within that $7 million rate reduction, there are going to be some first-time credits that customers have not seen on the bill before. And I'm sure that at some point, everyone in this room will get a call asking what they are. So I think this would be helpful. They're going to see a credit related to a thing called EDIT, okay, which I am nowhere near the expert on, but what it's going to be doing is giving back excess deferred income taxes, otherwise known as EDIT or EDIT, and customers are going to see a line item credit on their bill for that. They're going to see it for 6 years. So it's significant. For instance, the annual amount of the total EDIT credit the customers are going to see beginning in year one is $16.3 million. And it's divided up, it gets a little technical here, but it's divided up into two different sections, of 5.9 and 10.4 million. But those line items, and I believe, are they gonna be one? Okay, we're gonna have two line items. For technicality, one is 5.9 million over 5 years, and that's for what they call non-protected, non-property related EDIT. It's not gonna say all that on the bill, because it'll just, you'll get so many calls, you'll wonder what to do with it. And then the other one is 10.4 million amortized over 6 years for non-protected property-related EDIT. So those line item credits will be done at the end of 6 years. They'll be subjected to auditing on a regular basis. And why did everyone agree that that's the best way to do it? So we don't have to come in for a rate case to readjust rates, because no one wants to do that if it's not needed. So that was a really nice, I think, agreement amongst all the parties, since it's really a give back of something. When that's over, that line item credit will just disappear. Now, in addition to this $7 million rate decrease, there's going to be some really significant additional credits. One-time credits are going to appear on the bills too. First, in an amount that will be determined later, there's going to be a credit for the difference between rates that went into effect on March 17th and rates that we hope you will approve today. As we always do, 60 days after a final commission order, we put together the refund plan. We can't calculate it until we know the date they actually go into effect, but we provide a complete plan to staff, DPA, and your honors as a compliance filing. That will be a significant amount. Another one-time bill credit that customers are going to see, or for what we call excess merger synergies, which is savings. And the way to describe this is that in the last rate case, Delmarva agreed that it will put its projected savings, what it's going to save through efficiencies through the merger, into the rates. And if we do better than we expected, we save more money, we reduce our costs more, then we'll make sure that that goes to customers in this rate case. And happy to inform you that we actually did significantly better in saving money on our operations, to the tune of almost $3 million. It's $2.8 million. That will be seen by customers as a one-time credit on their bill. And I believe it's going to be 60 days from the date that you approve this settlement, if you decide to do so. Again, I can't tell you exactly what that'll be per customer yet, because it's going to be divided up by class, by customer, but that's going to be a significant amount too, and it's one that we're very proud to talk about, because when you end up saving more in efficiencies than you thought by that amount, that's a really good thing. And it's really great for customers, because in the future, when you have a test period, that's baked in now, right? Those savings are going to be in. If you save more than you thought, they're going to be in, and that's great, great for the perspective of customers and for the company. And then there's going to be another one-time credit, another big one, of $2.5 million. Now, that one, as you'll recall, back in February, you put into place what's called a regulatory liability, which requires all utilities in the state to track and set aside the amount of taxes that they're no longer paying as a result of the TCJA. You treated, because of its special circumstances, we had a rate case pending. You said, you know what, Delmarva, you go ahead and you give those taxes back in this case. But we had about a month and a half from February 1st until March 17th, when the rates are going into effect, where we didn't give that money back. So Delmarva asked, and the parties wholeheartedly agreed, that it would be the best thing to do for customers is to give that all back now, and the regulatory liability for Delmarva. And so in that 1.5 months, there was $2.5 million in taxes that we didn't have to pass through to customers. So we're giving that back as a one-time credit too, and that'll be done in 60 days. So I know it's a little complicated, but it's a lot of good news. Customers are going to see something along the lines of that they've never seen before that I've been involved, and we're happy about it. I think everyone here is very happy about it. I believe Mr. Kowalko is even happy about it, which is not something we see all the time when we're dealing with rate cases. Isn't that true, Representative? So with that, if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. I have, the hardest working man in regulatory here, Mr. Zeminski, in case you have any questions about what the heck EDIT is or how it works. Although I'm sure he'd be just as happy if he didn't, but he's here just in case you do. And if you allow me one thing, we also have Ms. DeVito here. She came down in case you had any questions, technical questions related to the prior docket. You didn't, but I would like to thank her for coming as well. Sue DeVito is the director. These are two of our directors in regulatory, and they really keep people like Heather and I doing our jobs. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goodman. Mr. Geddes?
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, I'm sure on June 26th that Mr. Goodman's admission or characterization of Mr. Quinnen as pleasant would not apply to either the DPA or this particular spokesperson. As Mr. Goodman alluded to, it did take us a while to get this finalized. I think the meat of what he discussed is in paragraph 3 and paragraph 4 of the settlement agreement, which did take some time to resolve. But I did want to point out paragraph 4 of the settlement agreement, which the hearing examiner adopted and all settling parties agreed to, and that is allowing the staff to bring a cost allocation docket before you within 6 months of you signing this order. Just as a side, I've been here 30 years, I've never used it. I'm not about to start now. Anyway, I lost my train. Anyway, allows staff to bring cost allocation matter before you within 6 months if it chooses to do so for your consideration. And the reason staff did that is that that particular issue is a complex one. It involves other jurisdictions such as Maryland, and the effort to try to get these refunds and reductions to the customers as soon as possible was inconsistent with trying to get that particular cost allocation issue resolved. And it was staff's position, and the other parties agreed, that it should be bifurcated and brought as a separate docket, not as a workshop, but as a docket in a formal way, so that the issue can be finally resolved. This has carried over from the last electric case. Staff was reluctant to carry it over from this case, but given the numbers that Mr. Goodman discussed with you and the impact on bills, we thought it was in the ratepayers' interest to not try to resolve it in the context of this revenue proceeding, but to move it to another potential docket. Obviously, the commission would have the option as whether it wants to consider it or not. But I just wanted you to be aware of that particular provision because Mr. Goodman didn't discuss it specifically. Staff supports the settlement agreement, the hearing examiner's discussion, and the proposed order that's before you.
Thank you, Mr. Geddes. I heard every word, Mr. Geddes. Ms. Iori?
Thank you, Chairman Winslow. The DPA really doesn't have anything to add to the discussion that you've heard. Yes, we did have 2 days, 2.5 days of negotiations on the settlement agreement. I will say the best part of that was that Mr. Quinnen had to stay in Delaware, so I got to have dinner with him. Don't tell my husband. But, but yes, this was a very hard-fought settlement, and as Mr. Goodman said, there are a lot of particulars in it, but that's because of the nature of the TCJA, which really is kind of a one-time thing. Going forward, Delmarva's rates, or revenue requirement, I should say, for its taxes will be calculated on the 21% rate, not the 35. So that one-time issue is now done, and we would hope that you would approve, or accept the hearing examiner's report and enter order number 9248. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Iori. Representative Kowalko?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to say, and I've been to a lot of these. I've been an intervener. I've just been president. I really want to. My heart is swollen with pride for this group, for the staff, for the hearing examiner, for DP&L, for the public advocate's office. I just, I've waited a long time to be able to show some sense of accomplishment to my ratepayers and constituents, other than just being a readout, a defensive advocate, trying to keep their rates in check. This is really positive news. I also want to welcome my good friend Raj Barua and congratulate him on his appointment as the executive director. So I really appreciate the hard work that was put into this. I really appreciate Mr. Slater and his efforts throughout this whole thing, and we've sort of, been in contact. I wasn't trying to influence him, and he wasn't trying to influence me, but he certainly had more good things to say than I could ever have come up with. And I want to especially congratulate Mr. Goodman for a job well done in this matter. This is very important that we show the public, and I believe the Public Service Commission understands this, that we show the public their interests are first and foremost. So I just want to congratulate everybody, and I want to say for the record that I am open to any and all suggestions. And my cell phone is 302-547-9351. To any suggestions, and this may be out of order, but I'm going to say it anyway, to how we can extricate ourselves from the Bloom surcharge contract. And I know that it's nobody's fault here but mine and the rest of the legislators that passed that law. But I do welcome any, you have a suggestion, come to me. I will absolutely consider it. I mulled over many other, and it's not a part of this case, and it's certainly not anybody in this room to blame except myself. So I want to thank you all for working on this case and doing this for the ratepayers. And it's a good day for the Delmarva ratepayers and for the taxpayers of the state of Delaware. Thank you.
Representative Kowalko, thank you very much for your comments. They're appreciated. I hope, and I'm sure you did notice that some of the items that are going to the benefit of the consumers in this particular matter are probably a result of the merger. Also, I want you to know that this commission acted immediately on the distribution planning, which is something that you're very interested in, and that we've already opened a docket, that we've already had a first public meeting or hearing workshop on it, and another one is scheduled for the beginning of September. You're welcome to attend. So we're going full speed, as Mr. Slater and I mentioned when we last saw you in a different room. That is going forward very quickly and hopefully in a very positive way. So I think there's more good news that will be coming your way. And I want to just say that we don't get too many representatives or senators to stop by to say hello. So we do send back our appreciation for your attention. Sometimes we don't necessarily like exactly what you say, as you know. But we understand your role and we appreciate your interest in our organization and all the people that interrelate with it. And we wish you well, and thank you for your input, sir.
And I thank you back, especially about the distribution planning. That is good news to know that we are not going to just use that as a cover play. We're actually doing that.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Commissioners, any questions of the parties? First, I'm sorry. Are there any other interveners that I have not noticed? I don't believe. Denrek? Mr. Noyes?
Hiding in the back. Thank you, Chair Winslow, Commissioners. DENREC intervened in this docket, as it has in previous rate cases, to keep an eye on any possible changes to rate structures that could affect policy questions. Otherwise, we've taken a back seat to the other parties in this matter. We have no objection to the settlement. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Noyes. Commissioner Conaway?
And we have a question right here.
No, Commissioner Correa?
Overall, as you mentioned, sir, that all the credits and the processes are in favor of the customers and consumers. So we appreciate that very much, and your comments also, sir. My question is that on the bill, when we have 5-year credit and a 6-year credit, and then 2 credits, one time each, will that be mentioned that this is a one-time credit, so customers don't call you back, and like thousands of them? Will you print it that way on the bill, one-time credit, or it will be just shown as a credit, or even as a note at the bottom of the bill?
We normally do that, but Dr. Barua asked that we specifically forward all of the calls to him. Yes, Your Honor, one of the challenges that we have anytime there's a change on a bill or rates is educating customers. This case is more complicated. And so I've already been working with our communications group, both on general education, how are we going to show this in the bill? Because unfortunately, when a lot of people open their bill, they just get annoyed by the inserts. So we also try and explain it on the bill itself. But a lot of people don't read those things, they just see the bill. So it's going to be a little bit of a challenge, but yes, we will explain that, what's a one-time credit, what's not. And we will have the hundreds of professionals that staff our call center who have an amazing amount of stuff they have to know and be prepared to respond to. There'll be training there. And we're going to, I know that, staff understands this stuff really well. I know that DPA is going to understand it well, and hopefully won't have to field too many calls because it's positive stuff. But yeah, if it's not there the next week and they didn't understand the explanation, there might be calls. But it's a great question because it's always a challenge. And this time, it's a little more of a challenge. But luckily, it's good stuff. It's not, what's this new charge or what's this new fee or tax or anything like that that gets people angry, and we have to talk about statutes and all that. This is we're giving money back because of tax cuts, and Delmarva doesn't keep that. They give it back.
Commissioner Drexler.
I wish I had my bill with me, because then I'd be able to answer this question myself, but for Mr. Goodman, will these, not the 3 credits, 2 or 3 credits that you talked about that were one-time credits, but the items that were either going to be 1 or 2 line items for the 6-year term,
Yes.
will those keep the bill, will they still be the same number of pages and not have to produce extra pages for people?
I don't expect, if, we're talking about maybe that much space.
Okay.
Right, it's just going to be, so if you look at your bill now and there are certain things that are broken out,
Right.
like how much you're
Right.
paying for renewable portfolio credits and things like that. So there'll just be something like that.
So you won't go to an extra page?
No, I mean,
You're
of course.
promising.
Well, if someone's bill is at the bottom of a
Yeah.
page, I can't say it won't bump it over, but
Yeah.
yeah, you will not see a complicated page of
Because
information.
that's really going to offset if it, the
Right.
2 little items that now create a 6th or 5th page or something, whatever it is,
Absolutely.
yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
I hopefully it'll just be a couple lines, very simple.
Smush them in there.
Awesome.
I think that Mr. Quinnen probably articulated what happened as well as Ms. Iori during this whole process, but I would just like to thank our hearing examiner, Mark Lawrence, because he wrote 78 pages. I thought it was concise and to the point, but it was 78 pages plus the exhibits. And he really pretty clearly showed us the back and forth on all the issues. And then it was nice to see how the settlement came together, which was very positive, I think, for the company as well as for consumers. So my hats off to all of the litigants who participated. You did a really fine job, and thanks to Hearing Examiner Lawrence for his good work, and Commissioner Conaway.
Move that we adopt order number 9248.
I second it.
Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying,
Mr. Chair, this is Commissioner Gray. I'd just like to say thank you, and I'm back on mute.
yes, sir. Yes, any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries, 1 not voting. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Safe trip home, Mike.
Thank you.
There's nothing on our hearing schedule today. Is there anyone here from the public that would like to make a public comment, except for Representative Kowalko, who's already had his fixed time? No, you have anything else you want to say? Come on.
No, I'm serious about it. Call
Okay.
Bloom.
We're positive that you are, sir. Mr. Noyes, anything from the environmental community we'd like to you can inform us about?
Nothing this afternoon, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Director's comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I want to start with 2 thanks. Thank you, Representative Kowalko.
Oh, excuse me for a second. Representative Kowalko, if we'd known he was your good friend. No.
I was going to go there. It just so happened by fate that our 2 boys grew up together from kindergarten, and that's the only reason. But it's been a pleasure. Hey, Mr. Goodman, thank you, but my phone is on speed dial. There's a whole bunch of retired Delmarva employees in my neighborhood. I'll be sure to send those calls to them. They need work to do. Thank you. Just in a reverse order, the next commission meeting is on Thursday, September 6th, 2018, here at 1 p.m. There is a workshop on the distribution systems planning docket. It is on September 5th here at 1 p.m. Representative Coacqua, you're welcome to join us. And the last thing we have today is a presentation, as you requested, Mr. Chairman, by Harry Warren of the Center for Renewables Integration on smart inverters and the recently released IEEE 1547-2018 revised standard.
Welcome, Mr. Warren.
To be introduced by Ms. Pam Knotts. Staff extraordinaire.
Mr. Warren looks different than he does from the last time I saw him.
I've been consulting, so I had to add a beard for credibility.
I probably look a little different too.
Hardly changed the day.
Mr. Chair,
Are you
I'm
saying I
gonna
was fat then?
Thank you and have a nice afternoon.
Thank you, safe travels.
Good afternoon, Chairman Winslow and Commissioners. I'd like to introduce Harry Warren to you. Many of you already know Harry. Mr. Warren is the president of Clean Grid Advisors since 2014 and the co-founder of the Center for Renewable Integration since 2017. He is focused on the development of renewable energy and the progressive and intelligent use of the electric grid. He is also currently chairing the working group on smart inverters in the Maryland Public Service Commission's Public Conference 44, or better known as PC 44 proceeding. Previously, he was at Community Energy, Inc., where he was the executive vice president, and as many of you will remember from his time as president of the Washington Gas Energy Service, he came before the commission many times. Welcome, Harry, and thank you for presenting today.
Thank you, Pam. Thanks for the nice introduction. Chairman Winslow, good to see you.
Nice to see you.
And commissioners, good to see you all as well. Staff, other parties. I think let me first say that was a marvel of administrative efficiency to watch the first 40 minutes of this meeting and the way you got through so many cases. That was great. So I will now take up a couple of hours, I guess, that you sort of talk about smart inverters.
You'll miss us at the end of that presentation.
It would seem appropriate. It would seem appropriate. All right, so let's see. We have some slides here. I'll see how I do going over my shoulder here. I think what I'll do is I have a very brief little set of slides. I'll try to go through them pretty quickly to leave time for questions and answers. As Pam mentioned, some of what you're going to hear is the experience that I've accumulated a little bit over the past several months in the Maryland PC 44 docket. There's an interconnection group, which is a major part of that docket. And partway through, we set up a particular subgroup on the smart inverter issue. It was one of the designated issues that they had, and it's been getting continuing focus now as that docket has proceeded. Let's see. All right. Let's see. Is it the right one there? There we go. Okay. I think I won't bore you about the Center for Renewables Integration, except to say that it's a group that a few of us set up a year ago, really very specifically for this kind of purpose, to try to provide some assistance, education, information to state policymakers who are working on issues of grid modernization, specifically things that were important to the increasing penetration of renewable energy. And I know Chairman Winslow is well acquainted with Gene Fox, one of my co-founders, the former president of the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities, wonderful person who's involved with our organization as well. So I think to start here, let's start. I'll go past our resumes there to my first little picture. So what is a smart inverter? And I think it's a term that's used widely, probably a little bit, that lacks a little bit of precision into what it really means. But I'd focus your attention on really a couple of key features that people care about with so-called smart inverters. One, they have what are called ride-through capabilities, and I'll be discussing that a little bit in a few minutes. The second thing is they have an ability for voltage control, to modulate their active power output and their reactive power output, for all of you electrical engineering fans, in order to help modulate their performance on the grid. There's also some nod to communications capabilities. so that in the long term, there could actually be active utility management and control of these inverters, although the other features that I'm going to talk about, as I listed on the slide, are really autonomous. The inverters behave a certain way without any sort of external utility control. Interesting to note that many of the inverters that are on the market today actually have these features at some degree built into them. But what we're going to talk about in a minute is there's just been an effort to systematize those features and the standards and requirements around those features in a national standard. So the sort of slow evolution of these capabilities is now coming under a fully comprehensive national standard. And that standard is IEEE 1547. This is a standard that has been in place for inverters in general for many, many years. I think the original version was written in 2003, maybe, this major standard. So now we have IEEE 1547 2018. It was just approved in April of this year. So that is the standard now that sets out all of these ride-through standards, these voltage control standards, as well as a number of other characteristics of inverters, things about everything from harmonics to flicker and a bunch of other cool, electrical engineering features of these devices. Although that standard has now been adopted, we still have really a couple of years to go before we can say this whole process is completed. Because at this point, there is a companion standard that is being developed called 1547.1, which is a testing standard. And that is going to set the requirements around which organizations can validate that the inverters meet and behave in accordance with this new complicated standard. Once 1547.1 is completed, and that is probably going to be a year before that is released. Then the UL organization will issue their own testing protocols, UL 1741, that will conform with that new 1547.1. And that's when manufacturers will begin to have their equipment formally tested for compliance with the new standard. So it may be not until 2021 that we actually see UL-listed hardware on the shelf that is fully in conformance with these new standards, okay? So we have a little bit of time, although despite the efficiency that I saw this morning, I mean, I think you'll see there's a lot of regulatory work that may have to be done for any state to be ready to adopt and incorporate this new hardware onto its system. So that's what I'm going to talk about for a few minutes with you. Okay, I'm going to just talk a little about some of those major features, just because the different features will probably have a different regulatory path that will be interesting to you in terms of getting ready for this hardware. So what is ride-through? Inverters, I will say today, traditionally, for solar systems, mostly we think of them. Actually, some wind power systems use inverters as well. Batteries, which are direct current devices, right, need inverters to match up with our alternating current grid. For solar systems, which have sort of dominated the discussion, inverters are currently designed so that if they see any voltage or frequency fluctuation on the power line, they drop off instantaneously. Think of it as a safety measure, right? Mostly the reason you will see a voltage or a frequency disturbance is a power line is down, there's a problem out there, and you don't want these generators pushing power onto that line. However, this in a future of deep penetration of renewable energy, this can cause a problem, and that is a momentary disturbance in frequency or voltage could cause a tremendous amount of power generation to drop offline instantaneously, which would create a bigger problem potentially than the reason behind the voltage or frequency fluctuation in the first place. So the little picture, oh yeah, I think I'm a picture behind here, I apologize. I'm doing well up here. Oh, there we are, okay, sorry. So this graph here shows a situation that happened in California a few years back. This graph came from a NERC presentation I was at about a year ago. There was a fire A fire took down a transmission line, and the transmission system quickly recovered from that. It took 41 milliseconds, like just a couple of cycles of power, for the frequency and voltage to be restored in that sector. However, in a couple of seconds, in this particular case, over 1,000 megawatts of solar capacity dropped offline in that 41 milliseconds. Now, it turns out that, you know, again, in this particular area, everything was okay, but you can imagine the grid operators were very scared by this event. By the way, if you can see the little vertical hash marks on that graph, each one of those is a minute long. So you can see that even though these things dropped off in 41 milliseconds, it took many minutes for this solar power to come back online. And so that is the thing that grid operators are greatly concerned about as renewable energy generation increases, is that these inverters would drop off. So the idea of ride-through is that they won't trip off immediately, that within some frequency bands and within some voltage bands, they will actually stay online to try to ride through these short-term transients and stay online and not drop all the power off. I mentioned that some of these smart inverter features are actually incorporated in inverters today, and some of that has been at the behest of states like California, like Hawaii, that have very deep renewable energy penetration already, and their concerns over that have led them to develop some of their own standards you might be familiar with. Rule 21 in California is the most notable set of standards that were put in place at the state level to allow some of these features to be incorporated. Working on it. Okay, the good news is, I think from a technical standpoint, PJM is working with its stakeholders, utility companies and others, to sort of deal with this issue technically. There is a formal stakeholder process that is in place at PJM where they are trying to decide exactly how to set up these ride-through standards under the new requirements, so that potentially on an RTO-wide basis, but maybe with some local differences, they'll set up all the parameters around ride-through. And then, however, PJM, of course, has no authority over distributed generation. So then it falls to the states to formally adopt and incorporate whatever recommendations PJM and the stakeholder process create into whatever local codes, standards, utility policies, practices need to be managed at the state level, so that all of the distributed generation is also ready to ride through with this new equipment. Okay. All right, voltage control, so we can go to that one. So voltage control is something that is not really that interesting to the grid operators, the RTOs. It's more interesting to the local utilities. And by the way, I will say at the outset, I think you're very fortunate here. The PHI companies, in my experience with the Maryland group, some really great people. Steve Steffel, who may be known to you, is a real guru on this subject, who's on their technical staff there. So the PHI companies, Delmarva, have a really great deep knowledge in here. I learn a lot from their people at these meetings. This is an area, though, where there is probably a lot more work to be done at the state level, at the utility level. These inverters, under the new standard, there are various modes of operation that can be employed to help them control voltage on the system. They can set their power factor to a fixed number. They can have the power factor vary as a function of voltage. So you'll see there's a little table here I cribbed out of the IEEE standard. There's a constant power factor mode, a volt reactive power mode, an active reactive mode. And under each one of these modes, you have these little tables, which you can kind of squint at a little on the bottom, that say there's a bunch of different you don't have to read that, but there's a bunch of different settings within each mode that have to be determined. This is an area where it appears that there's going to have to be work done at the local utility level to decide which of these modes and which of the settings within those modes will local utilities prefer to use as these new inverters start getting connected to their grid. And I'll tell you, it seems to me that what I've kind of noticed in the PC44 process is one way of approaching all this is to say, well, there's lots of modes and lots of settings. The utilities might be able to just have a custom analysis every time a new inverter is ready to be connected of which mode to use and which settings to use. Now, obviously, that seems to me, for smaller systems, that may be unworkable. You know, maybe for very big systems, you might want to use all the flexibility you can, but you're probably going to need to have some easy standards for residential and smaller installations. So I think these are the kind of issues that you probably have to sort through technically, you know, I think at the state level. By the way, by mitigating, the reason that the Center for Renewables Integration is so interested in this is probably the second bullet here. By mitigating the distribution system impacts by controlling voltage better, you can increase what we typically call hosting capacity, right? You can put more solar power, more distributed generation on a particular distribution circuit if those are all behaving better in terms of their voltage control and active and reactive power control.
And for Representative Kowalko, it says on here, without costly distribution system upgrades.
Right.
Put that right into the distribution planning workshop.
There it is, yeah. Well,
Oh, this might come up.
No, I think that really is it's a key point. I mean, it really is very important because, I mean, you know, this notion of hosting capacity, there's a certain amount of, you know, flexibility in a distribution line to have generators, you know, hook on without causing voltage, you know, control problems on those circuits. But there typically comes a point where that next solar generator that's trying to interconnect finds out that a major upgrade of some kind is going to be necessary to voltage control systems, you know, on that circuit, wire sizes or whatever. And that can really be a financial burden to getting that new renewable capacity online because that incremental person just can't afford that, you know, in their economics. So by using these kinds of capabilities, that's that much more that's going to be able to be placed before we reach those barriers. Okay. Two things really quickly. I mentioned communications. There's kind of this diagram shows that there's only a little piece of the communications issue that's really covered in this IEEE standard. So I just use that as a word of caution. Don't think that this standard has solved all the problems of utilities potentially communicating with these devices in the future. And again, Steve Steffel has kind of been educating us that one of the big issues there is going to be low-cost, secure communications from the utilities to all these inverters. That's a very big issue that's going to have to be worked out. That's really outside of the scope of IEEE 1547, but that kind of brings in, you know, secure communications with utilities, distributed energy resource management systems. It's related, but a little outside the scope. Another issue which is coming up in Maryland that is also a little outside the scope of IEEE 1547, but is getting a lot of attention, is certain controls that battery storage systems have. While inverters that are used with battery storage will conform to these IEEE 1547 standards, they also, because they charge and discharge, there's other controls around them that can define whether they're operating purely to produce power that's going to be used within the building that they're located in, or are they planning to participate in wholesale markets where they're putting power out into the street. There's a number of different operating modes for battery storage systems, as well as their charge and discharge characteristics that go beyond the formal 1547 standards requirements. And so I showed here in some highlights, there are some new terms that are being kicked around in Maryland: proposed use, net system capacity, inadvertent export, a number of other issues. And I raised that because one of the questions that was asked in a commission hearing in Maryland was, Are all these battery problems taken care of when we implement this new standard? And unfortunately, the answer is no. There are some additional issues that, with respect to standards around batteries, that have to be addressed. Last slide, you know, what we are looking at doing in Maryland and what to the Center for Renewables Integration seems like a good model is that we kind of recommend that states have a roadmap for implementing these standards. You have about 2 years probably until the fully compliant hardware starts to show up on the shelves. In order to make the technical decisions you have to make about voltage issues, and then to get through, you know, whether it's going to require actual formal changes to any codes, regulations, utility standards, practices, tariffs, you know, it can take some time as well. So having a roadmap and starting to lay out what are all the things that have to be done so that you can make sure you get ahead of this issue, so that you don't wind up in a situation where the hardware is ready to go and people don't know quite how they're supposed to install it here, you know, in Delaware. Now, again, you'll be well coordinated, certainly as, you know, with DC and Maryland, you have the same utilities, you know, which is a real benefit to you there. So I think everybody will be working on this. But that's sort of our recommendation. Get a roadmap going. Probably begin the discussions of utility control. That's probably a little further out, but, you know, that's probably the, maybe holy grail is like the wrong, metaphor there, but it really would allow the maximum use of these at some point in the future. And then again, battery standards are something you probably also need to be working on now because the batteries are out there and they're ready to come as well. Hope that was useful. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Mr. Warren, thank you so much. That was really a very down-to-earth, direct, understandable presentation,
Good.
Informative, and the roadmap idea is a good one. I'm sure that the staff will think about what you've had to say and talk about it. And we obviously oftentimes will bootstrap. In other words, we'll borrow from Maryland or vice versa. And so I guess it's even possible that we could have staff liaison with the Maryland staff on this particular issue. I don't know if OPSI, I might mention at OPSI, this is going on and see if we can percolate some more interest in other states. So thank you so much. Commissioners, Mr. Warren is, like I said, he's the rock star of renewable energy. He's right here.
Oh, wow.
Representative Kowalko has a question for you.
Yeah, it's not really a question, it's a statement for the commission too. As you work toward a roadmap, or are you creating a roadmap and all that, I hope that we could, if there's changes in the code necessary, have them accomplished, even preemptively, to establishing the final roadmap, so that we don't have, we don't work very quickly in Dover, in Leghorn. And that's not, it's, problem of a part-time legislator, and it's very difficult sometimes to educate people on this thing. I find it complex for me, and I've been trying to learn everything I can about it. But I think if the commission sees any potential need for a code change of any type or a code enhancement, that we get to that stage quicker rather than later, even if we end up going in a different direction on the roadmap, just have it in place.
Are you suggesting that you may be receptive to assisting us with respect to legislation in this area?
I certainly am.
Thank you very much, Representative. I appreciate that. Commissioners, no questions. Thank you, Harry.
Thank you, Chairman.
I missed you at NEMA. I met Harry again at NEMA. I like to attend the National Energy Marketers Association meeting because I learn a lot about their situation, their discussions. I also listen to Ms. Iori about them as well. So I missed you last time, Harry. I know you were up in New York fighting the good fight. Okay, is there anything else, Raj?
Yes, I do have something I would like to ask, please.
Certainly.
First, I would like to thank hearing examiner Mark Lawrence for sending packets ahead of time. And I'd like to ask, after 17 years, would it be possible to get our packets any earlier so that I don't have to spend the whole weekend before a meeting reading?
I will try. Well,
Thank you,
with all good intention. We have had this discussion, and I was trying to hold her back. That was what it was. We will try to get it a little earlier, and at least maybe give us 2 cycles of this meeting schedule to try and see if we can. I understand we've talked about it. It would also need the cooperation of all the regular parties who work with us. That would be very appreciated. But we'll definitely, and I'll give you an update by the time we get to the next meeting. Would that be acceptable?
Yes.
I appreciate Commissioner Conaway's request. Of course, she and I and all the other commissioners are also cognizant of the fact that sometimes deadlines drive things to happen, and that things happen at the last few days sometimes before a meeting, so that perfection or getting everything in advance of a weekend is a very good goal, but just some improvement in that area would be appreciated.
We'll try,
Okay,
definitely.
Tom Walsh, anything for the good of the order?
Chairman Winslow, nothing.
Okay, it was a good meeting. Thank you all for attending. We're adjourned.